At 74 years old, Judge Harlan Webb had given 41 years to the Cuthbert County bench, and the town thanked him by asking him to carry boxes out of a building they were about to tear down. What he found bricked into the basement wall behind a dead boiler was a rusted steel box that would end a United States Senate campaign and free a man who had been in prison for 40 years. It was a cold morning in early March when they handed him the key. The old courthouse on Lambert Street had been closed for 6 years. The county had built a glass and steel justice center 2 blocks over, and now the old building was scheduled for demolition. In its place, they planned to pour a parking structure in a small memorial plaza. The plaza was going to be named the Bradford Vance Civic Square, after the county's most famous son, the man who had risen from district attorney to attorney general and was now at 71 the favorite to win a seat in the United States Senate. Harlan had not wanted to come. He had stood in that courthouse for most of his life. He had sworn his first oath in that building when Gerald Ford was president. But the new county manager, a polite young man named Kevin Doss, had called him and asked, in that careful voice people use with the old, if Judge Webb would like to say goodbye to the place and help sort through what was left in the basement archive before the wrecking crew arrived. Most of it's trash, Your Honor, Kevin had said. Water damage. But there might be a few things worth saving for the Historical Society. You knew that building better than anyone. So at 8 in the morning, Harlan parked his old pickup on Lambert Street, climbed the worn granite steps one at a time, and let himself in with a brass key that no longer fit any lock that mattered. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper and cold stone. The lights in the lobby had been cut, so he carried a flashlight. His knees ached on the stairs down to the basement. He was a tall man, stooped now, with white hair combed straight back and wire-rimmed glasses he had worn for 30 years. He wore a flannel shirt under a canvas coat, and his hands, big and spotted, had the look of saddle leather. He had been a judge, but he had grown up on a tobacco farm, and his hands had never forgotten it. The basement was a long, low room full of metal shelves. Bankers' boxes sagged on every one of them, their cardboard soft with moisture. He set his flashlight on a table and started reading labels. Property tax records, 1971. Marriage licenses, 1960 to 1968. Jury rolls, old deeds, the bones of a county. He worked for 2 hours. A crew of 3 men from the demolition company came down around 10, looked around, and started hauling boxes up the stairs to a dumpster on the street. They were young and quick, and they did not look at the labels. They were not paid to read. Anything down here we should know about, Pop? One of them asked. He was maybe 25, with a beard and a yellow hard hat pushed back on his head. Just history, Harlan said. The young man grinned. They're knocking the history down Thursday. You got till then. Thursday, 4 days. Harlan had assumed he had weeks. He said nothing, but something tightened in his chest. He had not known the date was set. He kept working, and it was in the far corner, behind a furnace that had not run since the first Bush administration, that he noticed the wall. The basement walls were old brick, painted gray a long time ago, but in the corner, low and half hidden by the dead boiler, a section of brick was a different color, newer. The mortar between those bricks was smoother, paler than the rest. Someone, sometime, had opened that wall and closed it again. Harlan had spent 41 years learning to notice the thing that did not fit. A witness who answered a question 1 second too fast. A signature that leaned the wrong way. A man who would not meet your eyes when he said he was sorry. He stood there with his flashlight, and he looked at that patch of newer brick, and the old habit woke up in him like a dog hearing a familiar truck. He got down on his knees, which took some doing. He pushed at the bricks. Most held, but 2 of them near the bottom rocked under his fingers. The mortar around them was not mortar at all. It was plaster, painted gray to match. He pried at them with his pocket knife. It took 20 minutes. His hands shook, not from his age, but from something deeper that he could not yet name. When the 2 bricks finally came free, there was a dark space behind them, no bigger than a bread box. And inside it was a steel box. It was an old document box, the kind banks once used, rust eating the corners, a small lock on the front. He pulled it out. It was heavier than he expected. He sat down on the cold floor with his back against the dead boiler, the box in his lap, and for a moment he just held it. The lock was rusted shut. He worked it with the knife until the hasp snapped. He lifted the lid. Inside was a manila folder, swollen with damp but intact, wrapped twice in plastic by someone who had known how to protect paper. There was a sealed envelope. There was a small spiral notebook, and there was a single photograph, black and white, of a burned-out building. He opened the folder, and the first page he saw was a court caption he had not read in 40 years. The State of North Carolina versus Eli Booker, Cuthbert County Superior Court, 1986. Harlan Webb sat very still on that cold floor. He had been 34 years old in 1986. He had been a judge for 2 years, and the State versus Eli Booker was the first murder case he had ever tried. He remembered the boy. Eli Booker had been 24, a black man who worked nights at the lumber mill, who had no money, and a court-appointed lawyer who was 3 years out of school. They said Eli had set the fire at the Calhoun warehouse that killed the night watchman, a man named Roy Tilden. They said Eli did it because Tilden had caught him stealing. The prosecutor told the jury that Eli Booker was a thief who became a killer in a single night. The prosecutor had been a young man too then, ambitious, sharp, with a voice that filled a room and a way of looking at a jury like he was letting them in on a secret. His name was Bradford Vance. The jury had taken 4 hours. They came back guilty, and Harlan Webb, 34 years old, 2 years on the bench, had sentenced Eli Booker to life in prison. He had never forgotten it. Not because he thought it was wrong, exactly. For 40 years, he had told himself, the jury decides. The judge only keeps the rules. But there had been a thing about that trial that had never sat right in him. A lab report that the defense said it had asked for and never received. A witness who changed her story on the stand and was not pressed about it. He had felt, even then, the way a man feels a draft in a sealed room, that something was loose in that courtroom and nobody would point at it. He had let it go. He was young. Vance was already powerful, already the kind of man whose phone calls got returned. And the system had spoken. So Harlan Webb had banged his gavel and moved on to the next case and the next for 39 more years. He remembered the courtroom that summer the way you remember a room you were sick in. The ceiling fans turning slow in the heat. The windows open because the air conditioning had failed and nobody had the money to fix it. Eli Booker in a borrowed gray suit, 2 sizes too big, sitting so still he might have been carved. His mother in the second row every single day. A small woman in a Sunday dress, her hands folded, her lips moving in prayer that never once raised her voice. He remembered the court-appointed lawyer, a boy named Sutton, fresh from law school, who had stood up to object and then sat down again when Vance turned and looked at him. He remembered the fire marshal, Vance's hunting friend, saying the words, signs consistent with an intentional act, so smoothly you would think he had practiced them in a mirror. And he remembered the witness, a woman named Cora Pugh, who worked the diner across from the mill, who had told the police one thing in the spring and told the jury another thing in the summer. And how when Sutton tried, weakly, to ask her about the change, Vance had stood and objected and Harlan had sustained it because that was the rule, and he had not pushed because pushing was not his job. He remembered most of all the moment Sutton had asked, almost in passing, whether the defense had ever received the state's fire analysis, and Vance had said without blinking that all relevant materials had been provided. All relevant materials. Harlan had written those 3 words in his own notes and underlined them, and then he had let the trial go on, because a judge keeps the rules, and the rule was that he had to take a sworn officer of the court at his word. He had taken Bradford Vance at his word, and Bradford Vance had been lying with a buried lab report sitting in his briefcase the whole time. Now he sat in the basement with the file in his lap and his heart going hard, and he began to read. The sealed envelope held the lab report, the real one. It was from the State Bureau of Investigation, dated 3 weeks before the trial. Its conclusion was printed in plain type at the bottom of the second page. The fire at the Calhoun warehouse had started in the building's old electrical panel. The cause was listed as accidental. There was no accelerant, there was no gasoline, there was no arson. Harlan read it 3 times. His hands were shaking now in a way he could not stop. This report had never come into his courtroom. The jury had heard a different story. They had heard a fire marshal, a friend of Vance's, testify that the fire showed signs consistent with an intentional act.
They had never heard the words electrical and accidental. They had never seen this page. The spiral notebook belonged to the court reporter. Harlan knew the handwriting before he saw the name on the first page. Ruth Calloway. She had been the county's stenographer for 33 years. She had taken down every word of every trial Harlan ever ran, sitting at her little machine below the bench, silent, exact, invisible the way the best of them are. Ruth had retired the same year the courthouse closed. He had thought of her, now and then, the way you think of a person who was always there and then was not. The notebook was Ruth's private record, not the official transcript. Her own notes, the things a stenographer sees and is not allowed to say. And on a page dated the week after the Booker verdict, in her small, careful hand she had written, "I have asked Mr. Vance twice about the SBI report. He says it is not relevant to the theory of the case. Today I saw him take a brown folder from the evidence table and put it in his own briefcase. The defense never received discovery on the lab finding. I believe an innocent man has been convicted. I do not know what I can do. I am a court reporter. No one asks me anything. But I will keep what I have kept." There was more. Pages of it, dates, names, the small, terrible details of a thing gone wrong. And at the very back of the notebook, a final entry, dated years later in the same hand grown a little shakier. "If you are reading this, you found the box where I left it before they closed the building. I could not carry this alone, and I could not throw it away. Someone with more standing than a stenographer will have to decide what to do. God forgive us all for being quiet." Harlan Webb sat on the floor of a building that would be rubble in 4 days, and he wept. He was an old man, and he did not weep easily. But he wept then, for the boy he had sentenced and the woman who had carried the truth in silence for 40 years and trusted that someone someday would be braver than they had been. Then he wiped his face with the back of his leathery hand, closed the box, and carried it up the stairs into the light. He did not say a word to the demolition crew. The first person he told was Kevin Doss, the county manager. He drove straight to the new Justice Center, the box under his arm, and asked to see him. Kevin came out smiling, expecting maybe a sentimental old judge with a few photographs for the Historical Society. Harlan laid it out on the man's desk. The file, the lab report, Ruth's notebook. He spoke plainly, the way he had spoken from the bench for 41 years, and Kevin Doss listened with his smile slowly going flat. "Your Honor," Kevin said when he was finished, this is from 1986. "Eli Booker is still in prison," Harlan said. "I checked from my phone in the parking lot. Central Prison. He's 64 years old. He has been there for 40 years for a fire he did not set." Kevin rubbed the back of his neck. "And you're saying, Senator Mr. Vance, that he, hid this?" "I'm saying the report never reached my courtroom, and a man who kept the trial's record believed Vance took it. I'm saying we owe Eli Booker a new look at his case. That's all I'm saying, for now." Kevin glanced at his door, then back at the box. "Sir, the dedication for the Civic Square is in 3 weeks. Mr. Vance is the keynote at the county dinner Friday. This is a very big year for him, for all of us. The new building, the Senate run, it's good for the county." He spread his hands. "Maybe this should go through the right channels, slowly, carefully. A man is 64 years old in a cell," Harlan said. "Slowly is a luxury he has already paid for." Kevin Doss did not call anyone that afternoon. Harlan could see it in his face. The young man was not cruel. He was just afraid, the way most people are afraid, of the size of the thing in front of him and the size of the man it touched. So Harlan went home. He lived alone in a brick house on the edge of town, the house he had shared with his wife, Margaret, until she passed 4 years back. He set the box on the kitchen table where they had eaten 10,000 suppers, and he made coffee, and he sat down to think. His son called that evening. Thomas Webb was 46, a corporate attorney in Charlotte, a careful man in good suits. Word travels fast in a small county, and Kevin Doss had a cousin, and the cousin had a wife. "Dad, what is this I'm hearing about you and Bradford Vance?" Harlan told him. He told it the same plain way. Thomas was quiet a long moment. "Dad, Bradford Vance is going to be a United States Senator. He has a campaign with lawyers whose hourly rate is more than your monthly pension. If you go after him with a 40-year-old box you found in a basement, you are not going to free anybody. You are going to end your reputation and probably get yourself sued.
And the demolition is going to happen anyway, and there will be nothing left to point to. The man is innocent, Thomas. Maybe he is. I'm sorry if he is. But you are 74. Let someone younger fight this. Let an organization fight this.
The innocence people, somebody with resources. Don't you do it alone.
There isn't time for somebody else, Harlan said. They're tearing the building down Thursday. And I'm the only judge left alive who sat in that courtroom and felt it go wrong and said nothing. He looked at the box on Margaret's table. I said nothing for 40 years, son. I am done saying nothing. Thomas sighed, the sigh of a son who loves his father and thinks him a fool. Just please be careful, he said. To understand why Harlan Webb would not let it go, you have to understand the 41 years. He had not come from money or from law. His father had grown tobacco on 40 acres of red clay, and Harlan had picked it every summer of his boyhood, his hands cracking in the heat, the gum staining them black. He had been the first in his family to finish high school, and the first in the county's memory to put himself through college and then law school on a string of jobs that left him thin. He had come back to Cuthbert County because it was home, and he had hung out a shingle, and he had taken whatever walked in the door. Wills, land disputes, a man who could not read the contract he had signed. He had run for judge at 32 because the old judge was retiring, and nobody else local would do it for the money. He had won, barely, and then he had won again and again for 40 years, because people learned a thing about Harlan Webb. He could not be bought, and he could not be hurried. And he treated the man in the crack boots the same as the man in the cashmere coat. In a county that did not have much, that was a kind of wealth, and they kept him in the job until he was too old to do it. He had married Margaret the year he made judge. She had been a school teacher, 3rd grade, for 32 years. She had read every opinion he ever wrote, sitting at the kitchen table with a red pen she never actually used on him. And she had told him once, near the end of her life, the only thing she ever criticized him for. "You let one go, Harlan," she had said. He had not had to ask which one. "That boy, you always knew." He had not been able to answer her. And then she was gone, and the box in the basement was still there in the dark, and now it was on her table. And Harlan understood that some debts are not paid in dollars. Some debts are paid in years, and some of them come due all at once. Tuesday morning, Harlan started making calls. He called the State Bureau of Investigation and asked for the archive of the Calhoun warehouse fire, case number from 1986. He called an old law clerk of his, a woman named Diane, who now worked for the State Appellate Defender's Office, and read her Ruth's notebook over the phone and listened to her go very quiet. He called the prison and asked to be put on the visitor list for Eli Booker, and by Tuesday afternoon, Bradford Vance knew. The first sign was a phone call from a man Harlan had never met, a campaign lawyer named Prescott, smooth as a river stone. "Judge Webb, what an honor. I've heard about you for years. Listen, I understand you've come across some old materials, sentimental things, from your courtroom days. The senator, well, Mr. Vance, he'd love to have those preserved properly. We'd be happy to send someone to collect them, get them archived professionally, with your name on the donation, of course." "They're not for donation," Harlan said. Of course. I just want to make sure that whatever you think you have, you understand the context. Documents from 40 years ago can be misread. Memories fade. Old men sometimes see patterns that aren't there." A pause, gentle as a knife. "It would be a shame, at the end of such a distinguished career, for there to be any confusion about your judgment, Your Honor." "My judgment is fine," Harlan said. "It's my silence I'm fixing." That evening, a black sedan Harlan did not recognize sat parked across the street from his brick house for the better part of an hour. It did not pull into the drive. Nobody got out. It simply sat there, engine running, while Harlan stood at his kitchen window with the lights off and the box on Margaret's table behind him. He was not a man who frightened easily, but he understood the message. They wanted him to know he was being watched. They wanted him to feel his age and his aloneness, and the long, dark stretch of road in front of his house with no neighbor close enough to hear. He did 3 things. He took photographs of the file, every page, with his phone, and he sent them to his son Thomas, and to Diane at the appellate office, and to a third address he kept for emergencies. He carried the original box out to the truck, drove it across town in the dark, and left it with the one person in the county he was certain Vance could not reach or buy. The pastor of the little Lutheran church he and Margaret had attended for 50 years, an old man named Tom Bridwell, who asked no questions, only said, "I'll keep it under the altar, Harlan. Nobody's getting past me to it," and meant it. And then Harlan went home, made himself a cup of coffee, sat back down at his wife's table, and waited for morning, and was not afraid anymore. Because a thing shared in 3 places cannot be made to disappear by a car in the dark. When he looked out again at midnight, the sedan was gone. The second sign came Wednesday morning. The demolition, which had been set for Thursday, was moved up. A notice went out from the county that the Lambert Street Courthouse would be raised Wednesday afternoon, for scheduling and safety reasons. The basement where Ruth had hidden her box for 40 years, where there might be more, where the very wall itself was evidence of a thing hidden and found, would be gone by sundown. Harlan was at the courthouse by 9. He stood on the granite steps in his canvas coat, an old man with a folder under his arm, in front of the wrecking crew and the orange machines, and he did the only thing he had left to do. He called the newspaper, not the county paper which Vance owned a piece of. He called the Raleigh paper, the big one, and he asked for the reporter whose name he had seen on a story about a wrongful conviction the year before. Her name was Nora Hale. She was 31, and she had been waiting her whole career for a phone call like the one she got from a retired small-town judge standing in front of a building about to come down. "Don't let them knock it down before someone sees that basement wall," Harlan told her. "The hiding place is the evidence. Once it's rubble, it's just an old man's story." Nora Hale made 2 calls of her own. The first was to a photographer. The second was to a judge of the state superior court she knew, who, within the hour, signed a temporary order halting the demolition pending review of newly discovered evidence in a capital matter. The orange machines went quiet. The courthouse stood. And by that evening, the story was on the front page of the Raleigh paper, above the fold, with a photograph of Harlan Webb standing on the steps and a headline that read, "Retired Judge Says Senate Frontrunner Hid Evidence That Jailed Innocent Man." If you have come this far in Harlan Webb's story, take a moment and subscribe, because what happened next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. The story did not break clean. These things never do. Bradford Vance's campaign came out hard. They put out a statement the same night calling the claims "the confused recollections of a man in failing health" and "a desperate smear timed to a Senate race." They noted correctly that Vance had not been the trial judge, only the prosecutor, and that a jury, not Bradford Vance, had convicted Eli Booker. They produced a former fire marshal who said the cause of the 1986 fire had always been a matter of professional dispute. They were good at this. They had been doing it for 40 years. For 2 days, it was a war of words, and the words were not on Harlan's side. He was old. He was alone. He had a rusty box and a dead woman's notebook. And against him stood a man with money, machines, and a story the county had been telling about itself for decades. And then Ruth Calloway walked back into it. She was not dead. Harlan had assumed she was. She had been older than him, and he had not seen her in years. But Ruth Calloway was 80 years old and living in a small house with a wide porch on the other side of the county. And when she opened the Raleigh paper and saw Harlan Webb on the steps of the courthouse holding her folder, she put down her coffee, picked up her telephone, and called the reporter, Nora Hale. "That box is mine," she said. "I bricked it into that wall myself in the spring of 2006, before they ever talked of closing the place. And I am not failing in my health, and I am not confused, and I have been waiting 40 years for somebody to find it. Send me to whoever needs to hear it. I will say it under oath. I will say it on the courthouse steps. I have been quiet long enough." Ruth Calloway had something more powerful than a box. She had a memory like a stenographer's machine, exact and merciless, and she had carbon copies. For 33 years, she had kept a private second set of her trial notes, the way some old reporters did, locked in a cedar chest. And among them was the original SBI lab report, stamped, received by the district attorney's office 3 weeks before the Booker trial, signed for by a young assistant district attorney named Bradford Vance. A jury had convicted Eli Booker. But it was Bradford Vance who had taken the page that proved the fire was an accident and put it in his briefcase. And a county stenographer had watched him do it and written it down and kept the copy and waited. And then a second voice came forward, one Harlan had not expected. Cora Pugh, the diner waitress, who had changed her story on the stand in 1986, was 73 now and dying slow of a thing in her lungs. She read the Raleigh paper from a recliner in her front room, and she called Nora Hale, and she told the truth. She had carried almost as long as Ruth had carried hers. Bradford Vance had come to see her 3 nights before her testimony. He had reminded her that she had a brother in the county jail on a charge that could go easy or go hard. He had not threatened her, not in words. He had simply explained how the world worked for people like her. And then he had told her what she was going to say, and she had said it, and she had hated herself for 40 years. I sent a boy to prison to keep my brother out of it, Cora told the reporter, her voice thin as paper. And my brother's been dead 20 years, and that boy is still in there. I'd like to fix one true thing before I go. 2 old women, a stenographer and a waitress, who had each been told for 40 years that nobody asked people like them anything. And now the whole state was asking. When that document hit the front page, the war of words was over. The state attorney general, who did not like Vance and had been waiting for a clean reason, opened a criminal inquiry into the suppression of evidence. The appellate defender's office, with Harlan's old clerk Diane leading it, filed an emergency petition to vacate Eli Booker's conviction, and the prison, after 40 years, let an old judge come and sit across a metal table from the man he had sentenced. Harlan drove 3 hours to Central Prison on a gray Friday. Eli Booker was 64 years old now, his hair gone white, his hands folded on the table. He had been 24 the last time Harlan had seen him. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 old men, one of whom had sent the other here. "I remember you," Eli said. His voice was rough from years of not being asked anything. "You were the judge, the young one." "I was," Harlan said. "I'm sorry it doesn't begin to cover it. But I'm going to say it anyway. I am sorry. I felt it was wrong, all those years ago, and I let the size of the men in that room frighten me into silence. That is the truth, and I have carried it. But I had no right to set it down on you." Eli Booker looked at him for a long time. "My mama died while I was in here," he said quietly. "My daughter was 3. She's 43 now. I missed all of it." He paused. "But you found it. After all this time, somebody found it." His eyes were wet. "I stopped believing anybody would." "A woman named Ruth Calloway never stopped," Harlan said. "She hid it where it would keep. We just had to be brave enough to read it." The hearing came 6 weeks later, in the new Glass Justice Center, 2 blocks from the old courthouse that still stood, unraised, the basement wall taped off as evidence. It did not take long. The science was not in dispute. The fire had been electrical. The conclusion had been hidden. The trial had been a fraud built on a buried page. Ruth Calloway testified for 40 minutes in a clear, steady voice, an 80-year-old court reporter finally allowed to speak instead of only to record. And when she laid the signed lab report on the clerk's table, you could hear the room stop breathing. Diane argued the law. The state did not fight it. The judge, a woman half Harlan's age, vacated the conviction of Eli Booker and ordered him released that afternoon. He walked out of prison after 40 years into the arms of a daughter who had been 3 years old when he went in. There were photographs. The whole county saw them. The whole state saw them. And Bradford Vance was not in the room. His campaign for the United States Senate ended the morning the lab report hit the front page, though it took him another week to admit it. The civic square that was to bear his name was quietly renamed, in the end, for nobody at all. The county council voted to call it simply Courthouse Square. The state attorney general's inquiry became a grand jury, and the grand jury returned an indictment. And Bradford Vance, 71 years old, who had built a life on putting other men in cages by any means he could find, was charged with obstruction of justice and felony suppression of evidence in a capital case. Harlan thought he would feel triumph. He did not, exactly. He felt the way you feel after a long fever breaks, empty and clean and very tired. He saw Vance once more by chance on the courthouse steps months later. The 2 old men stood 10 feet apart in the cold. Vance's good suit hung loose on him now. His campaign was gone, his name scraped off the square, his lawyers billing him by the hour to keep him out of the same kind of cell he had built for Eli Booker. "You could have left it closed, Harlan," Vance said. His voice had lost the room-filling power. It was just an old man's voice now. Some cases are better left closed. You ruined a great deal for the sake of one man nobody remembered. Harlan looked at him for a long moment, the way he had once looked at a witness who answered too fast. He remembered, Harlan said. Every day for 40 years, he remembered. The only people who got to forget were you and me. He settled his old hat on his head. I'm done being one of them. He went down the steps one at a time and did not look back. The county newspaper, the one Vance owned a piece of, did not write about it. But the Raleigh paper ran a long feature, 2,200 words, with a photograph of Ruth Calloway on her wide porch and Harlan Webb beside her. Two old people who had each carried half of a truth for 40 years and finally set it down together. The story was shared 100,000 times. Law school professors assigned it. A documentary crew came to town. Ruth, who had been invisible at the bottom of the bench for 33 years, became, at 80, the most quoted woman in the county, and she enjoyed every minute of it, and said so. Eli Booker moved into a small house near his daughter. The state paid him what the law allowed for 40 stolen years, which was money, and which was not nearly enough, and he knew it. And he took it anyway, because money is a kind of apology a system can manage when it cannot manage the other kind. He spent his first free summer learning the names of his grandchildren and sitting on his own porch in the evening, watching a sky no fence cut into squares. He came to see Harlan once, in the fall. They sat on Margaret's porch with coffee and did not talk much. They were not friends exactly. You cannot be friends with the man who sentenced you. But they were something, two men who had been in the same dark room, one in the cell and one on the bench, and who had both in the end walked out into the same light. I keep thinking I should be angry, Eli said, at you, at all of you. You've got the right, Harlan said. I know. I just don't have the years left to spend on it. Eli watched the sun go down over the tobacco fields. I spent enough already. A year after the box came out of the wall, the old courthouse on Lambert Street was not torn down after all. The county, embarrassed and then, slowly, proud, voted to restore it. They kept the basement wall exactly as Harlan had found it, the two pried-out bricks set in a small glass case with a brass plaque beneath. The plaque did not name Bradford Vance. It named Ruth Calloway, court reporter, 33 years, who kept what she was given, and Eli Booker, who waited. And at the bottom, because Harlan asked them to put it there and would not be argued out of it, one more line. The line read, "A truth buried in the dark does not die. It waits for someone brave enough to dig." The county changed in small ways after that, the way a town changes when it is made to look at itself. The young defense lawyer from 1986, Sutton, was an old man himself now, retired in Florida, and he wrote Harlan a letter that took him 4 pages to say one thing, which was that he had known too in his bones and had been too green and too scared to fight and had carried it ever since. The state public defender's office, shamed and then determined, opened a unit to comb 40 years of Cuthbert County convictions for the same buried evidence fingerprint. And in the first year alone, they found 2 more. The Bar Association, which had once given Bradford Vance its highest honor, took his name off the award and put Ruth Calloway's on a scholarship for court reporters instead, which made her laugh out loud when they told her, and then made her cry. And on Lambert Street, one by one, things were set right. The diner across from the old mill, the one where Cora Pugh had worked, put a small framed copy of the Raleigh story on the wall by the register. A class of 3rd graders, the grandchildren of the county Harlan had judged, came to the restored courthouse on a field trip and stood in a quiet line to look at 2 old bricks in a glass case. Harlan Webb went back to that basement only once after the restoration. He stood in the corner where the boiler had been, by the wall that had held the box for 40 years, an old man with white hair and saddle-leather hands, and he thought about a young judge of 34 who had felt a draft in a sealed room and had not gone looking for the crack. He did not forgive that young man, but he understood him now. Fear is a quiet thing, and it dresses itself up as patience, as procedure, as respect for the size of powerful men. It tells you there will be a better time to speak, and the better time never comes. And one day you are 74 and the building is coming down, and the time is whatever time is left. He climbed the stairs into the light slowly, one at a time, the way he did everything now. Some debts are paid in dollars. Eli Booker's was. Some are paid in years, and his were 40 of them, and he would never get them back. But some debts are paid in courage, paid late, paid by an old man who finally refused to stay quiet. And those are the only ones that buy a thing worth having. They buy a man the right to climb his own stairs in peace. The courthouse stands on Lambert Street to this day, restored, its lights on, its doors open. People come to see the small glass case with the 2 old bricks. Children press their faces to it and ask their parents what it means. And the parents, more often than not, tell them the truth. It means that somebody hid something terrible in the dark. And it means that somebody, 40 years later, was brave enough to bring it into the light. A house built on cruelty cannot keep the cold out. And a truth, bricked into a wall, will wait as long as it has to, patient as winter, until the right hand comes to set it free.